you put a stop to that once and for all. Officer, those people are taking away our train. I want you to chase them away.
But they're only picking up a couple of nickels and dimes. They can't hurt your train.
I'm a taxpayer, and I demand my rights.
Sidney Kibrick walked away from $750 a week at just 11 years old. That's $13,000 in today's money. But why would a child abandon a fortune during the Great Depression? The answer lies in what really happened on the Little Rascals set. 16-hour workdays, 2 hours of school, and a co-star so violent that studio executives kept a casualty list of his victims. While America saw Alfalfa as the innocent victim, Sidney knew the terrifying truth. Now, as the sole survivor, he's revealing the dark reality that destroyed an entire generation of child stars. Sidney Kibrick was born on July 2, 1928, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. America was booming at the time. Jazz was everywhere, the stock market was flying high, and movies were just starting to talk. But that perfect picture didn't last. Just over a year later, in October 1929, everything collapsed. The Great Depression hit hard, and the Kibrick family was now surrounded by even more hardship. Sidney's parents couldn't wait around and hope things would get better. With barely enough money to get by, they packed up everything and moved to Los Angeles. Sidney was still a baby. His older brother Leonard was just 4 years old. The trip was more than 1,800 miles, and it wasn't a road trip for fun, it was survival. California promised jobs and opportunities, especially in the growing film business. Big studios like MGM and Hal Roach were looking for child actors, and the Kibricks hoped their boys might have a shot. That gamble paid off faster than anyone expected. One day, Sidney's mother took him and Leonard to Grauman's Chinese Theater. After the movie, a man came up to them. He pointed at Sidney and said, "I could use that little kid in the movies." That moment changed everything. That man turned out to be a talent scout. And just like that, 5-year-old Sidney was on his way to becoming a child star. It wasn't just any role. Sidney was cast in the famous Our Gang series. He was earning $750 a week. That might sound like a nice paycheck today, but back then, during the worst financial crisis in U.S. history, it was massive. In today's money, that's over $11,000 a week. The average adult was making about $16 a week. At just 5 years old, Sidney was the family's main source of income. Leonard, his older brother, had already paved the way. He was 4 years older and had joined Our Gang in 1934. Leonard usually played bullies, tough kids, the ones you love to hate. His last role in the series came in 1936, when another actor, Tommy Bond, took over the main bully role as Butch in 1937. Sidney stepped in as Butch's sidekick. They called him the Woem. That move created something rare in Hollywood, a real-life pair of brothers playing villains together in the same show. But behind the scenes, things weren't as happy as they looked on camera. They called it the Dream Factory, but for child actors like Sidney Kibrick in the 1930s, it felt more like a machine that never stopped. Every morning began the same way. 2 hours of mandatory schooling. That was it. Just 2 hours. As soon as class ended, the real work began. Some days, it lasted 6 hours. On others, it dragged on for 16. There were no breaks, no real concern for how tired or overwhelmed the children were. The directors had one goal: finish the day's shots, no matter what. Gordon Douglas, one of the main directors, didn't care if the kids were exhausted. If the scene wasn't done, they kept shooting. Back then, there were no strong laws to protect child actors. The Coogan Act, which was supposed to guarantee fair treatment and safeguard earnings, wouldn't be passed until 1939. By then, Sidney had already built a name for himself. But to get there, he had to survive some of the harshest conditions any child could face. The studio didn't care that he was just a kid. They cared about the product. And Sidney, like so many others, was part of that product. His first roles were tiny. In the 1937 movie Dead End, he was just one of 3 kids huddled in the background near a river dock. He also appeared in The Kid's Last Fight and The Bowery in 1933, again without recognition. But these background parts weren't just filler. They were survival lessons. On set, there was a clear chain of command among the kids. The ones with speaking lines, especially those with character names, were on top. Everyone else just tried to stay visible enough to get noticed. It was brutal. Friendships were rare. Competition was constant. Sidney slowly moved up that chain. By 1935, he wasn't just the kid in the background anymore. He became a regular in the Our Gang shorts. That meant more screen time, better pay, and a little more respect. He appeared in episodes like Anniversary Trouble, Beginner's Luck, and Little Papa, all in that same year. The workload increased, but so did the reward. While the world outside the studio was reeling from the Great Depression, Sidney had a steady job. His family, who had left Minneapolis for Los Angeles in search of opportunity, now had income thanks to their 2 sons. Leonard Kibrick, Sidney's older brother, was also in Our Gang. For most Americans in the 1930s, life was about survival. The average family earned around $1,368 a year. Many fathers were out of work. Entire neighborhoods went hungry. So even a modest paycheck from a child actor was enough to change a family's fortune. The entertainment industry, unlike most others, held steady during the crisis. People wanted to escape their problems, even for just an hour. And kids like Sidney were part of that escape. Studios could pay them less than adult actors and still draw crowds. Sidney Kibrick was just a small kid with freckles and red hair, but he became one of the most recognizable bad guys in early Hollywood comedy. In 1937, when Hal Roach needed a new bully for the Our Gang shorts, he replaced Leonard Kibrick with Tommy Bond, a loud and strong presence on screen. But Bond wasn't alone. Sidney, who was actually Leonard's younger brother, became his sidekick. The 2 of them, Butch and William, were total opposites. Bond stood nearly 4'10" with a booming voice. Sidney was barely 4'5", quick and wiry, with a sharp little bark when he spoke. On screen, they looked like trouble. "Come on, William," Butch would shout, and Sidney would charge in like a tiny bodyguard, arms flailing. But behind the camera, their relationship was the opposite. Bond treated Sidney like a little brother. He coached him on acting, shared snacks, and even lent him pocket money. In the summer of 1938, they traveled together to 37 theater openings across 4 states. They stayed in the same hotel room to save money. Audiences loved the act. One short, Party Fever, became the top-grossing comedy in over 200 theaters that year. The studios called it renewed bully interest. Sidney wasn't the obvious choice for the role. He was ranked 26th in height and 31st in weight among Roach's child actors. But that's exactly why they picked him. The producers believed Spanky and Alfalfa needed an enemy who didn't look scary. Someone scrappy. Someone who made the gang's wins feel earned. His red hair and freckles matched what people saw as a classic playground tease, especially during the Depression era. He and Carl Alfalfa Switzer didn't get along in real life either. Studio notes list 5 fights between them just in 1938. Roach used that tension in the scripts. Audiences were even encouraged to boo William in theaters. Some lobbies put up cardboard cutouts with signs that said, "Boo the William." It was one of the first times a studio used real hatred for marketing, something wrestling would copy decades later. But being hated on purpose isn't easy, especially for a kid. Sidney said the set felt structured and safe. But being the villain followed him everywhere. By age 10, he had a perfect scowl that directors loved. He almost never had to do a second take. But it came with a price. He was offered 14 outside roles between 1937 and 1940. 12 of them were just more bullies, or tough kids. Former co-star Jackie Cooper joked that Sidney got more booing at live appearances than the Wolfman. During tours, ushers had to walk him to the bathroom because kids threw popcorn at him or yelled insults. The weird part was, Sidney was polite, punctual, and well-behaved on set. The call sheets even said he never used bad language, but he still got stuck as the mean one. Psychologists now have a term for that: identity dissonance. It's the stress that happens when your real self and your public image don't match. Sidney said he learned to split himself in two. Sid was the real kid, and Wim was just a part he played. That mindset saved him. He stayed in school, avoided the usual child star crashes, and went into real estate when the acting stopped. Still, the nickname never left. At 23, Sidney applied for a job as a bank teller, but the manager recognized him and said, "We don't hire bullies." That joke cost him the job. Even in 1977, nearly 4 decades after Glove Taps, he received 312 fan letters. Over half of them asked if he'd beaten anyone up lately. At a 1986 Our Gang reunion, fans lined up for photos and begged him to slug them. Sometimes he played along, raising a fist for the camera. But inside, he worried. Every time he leaned into the joke, it felt like he was locking himself deeper into the old role. In truth, the real bully wasn't Sidney. It was Carl Switzer. On screen, Alfalfa looked like the poor victim. Off screen, it was the opposite. Switzer picked on background actors constantly. Most of them made just $3 a day and had no protection on set. He'd offer to share his lunch, then crush the dessert in front of them as a joke. One girl said he smeared glue in her hair right before a scene, and they had to cut a chunk of it out. On another day, he used a hose to soak a group of extras during filming, ruining their costumes. Each outfit cost $12 to clean, almost half their weekly pay. Roach's staff even kept a list of Switzer casualties, promising parents their kids wouldn't be placed near him. The irony was brutal. On camera, Wim would mess with Alfalfa's boxing gloves. But in real life, Switzer put hot pepper in Sidney's sandwiches just to get a laugh. Sidney called it opposite day. He was afraid to fight back. If he did, the scene would get ruined, and he'd get blamed. And while studio press releases called Switzer a model of spontaneity, they painted Wim as the problem. One time, Switzer poured India ink on Sidney's new white shoes just before a take. They cost $4.50 to replace, nearly a full day's pay. But the public never knew. All they saw was the script. Director Gordon Douglas had a tough job keeping order on set. He had nearly 30 kids running around every day. To stay on schedule, he used stopwatches, color-coded cue cards, and even a bell that rang every 30 seconds to remind everyone to be quiet. After Board of Education won the Oscar in 1936, Roach shortened each short film to just one reel. That meant directors had to tell a full story in less than 10 minutes. There wasn't time for delays, but Switzer still caused chaos. Douglas marked it in his notes as S-delay. It showed up 14 times during a 4-day shoot of Football Romeo. Douglas even tried military-style lineups. The kids had to recite their moves before every take. If they messed up, they got penalty points. 5 points meant they were sent home. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes chaos won anyway. On May 31, 1938, Hal Roach shocked Hollywood by selling his entire Our Gang franchise to MGM for just $25,000. That included every prop, story script, and even the child actors' contracts. In today's money, that's about $558,000. It happened because Roach was in financial trouble. Audiences were no longer interested in short comedies. They wanted full double features. And Roach had embarrassed the industry with a failed deal involving Mussolini's son. MGM saw an opportunity and took it. Almost overnight, the kids found themselves in a new world. Their paychecks now came from MGM. Their dressing rooms were moved across town. Their names and faces were sold like furniture. 7-year-old Spanky McFarland even had to re-sign his contract because Roach had let it expire. Others like Alfalfa Switzer were stunned to find that MGM now legally owned their screen identities, and there was no promise they'd still be stars. Things changed quickly. MGM had rules. Studio school was strict. Time cards were serious. Roach's set had felt like a backyard clubhouse. MGM felt like a factory. The children felt it deeply. It was like being pulled out of one school and dumped into another with no warning. No one talks much about that transition, but the kids never forgot it. Then came the name Change. When Roach bought back the old negatives in 1949, there was a catch. He couldn't use the Our Gang name. MGM forced him to erase their logo and all traces of the original titles. So his team came up with a workaround. They called the series The Little Rascals. It was a name pulled from old trade magazines. By 1954, those same films were back, airing in homes across America under a brand new title. But the change came at a cost. The child actors earned nothing from the reruns. MGM still owned Our Gang. Roach only owned the film prints. No royalties meant no money. Worse, editors began cutting out entire scenes to fit new time slots or avoid controversy. Some edits came after pressure from groups like the NAACP. 4-minute chunks were removed. No one watching knew anything was missing. The series had been changed forever, by a legal technicality. When MGM took over, they brought in 22-year-old George Sidney to direct the new episodes. He was ambitious and full of ideas. He had just filmed screen tests for Judy Garland. Sidney pushed MGM to buy Our Gang and took the reins quickly. But what he created was nothing like Roach's version. Roach had let the kids improvise. They could argue, laugh, or mess up lines. The cameras kept rolling. Sidney brought storyboards, music, multiple takes, and big dance scenes. It felt polished, but it lost the raw, silly charm. One episode, Aladdin's Lantern, looked like a Broadway show more than a kid's short. Sidney's version had schedules, meal breaks, tutors, and serious lighting setups. Kids got less time to play. Fans say that's when the series lost its magic. Sidney would go on to direct musicals like Showboat and Kiss Me, Kate. But the kids? They were now tiny cogs in a big studio machine. For some of them, the shift was too much. Sidney Kibrick had been acting since he was 5. By 11, he'd had enough. After filming Time Out for Lessons in 1939, he walked up to his mother and said, "I'm finished, Mom. I don't want to act anymore." She was stunned. His weekly pay was $750. That's more than most doctors made. It paid their rent, food, and even bought driving lessons for his older brother. But Sidney wouldn't budge. He said it again. Finished. And he walked off the set in costume. No retakes, no discussion. That single moment shook everyone. Studios expected kids to be obedient, but Sidney drew the line. His money had kept the family afloat during the Great Depression. In today's terms, his paycheck was worth about $13,000 a week. When he quit, the family lost 90% of their income. His father worked as an electrician, but barely made $20 a week. His mother tried to renegotiate a loan they had taken against Sidney's future earnings. His father pawned a watch just to pay rent. They had to move into a cheaper apartment near Mount Vernon Junior High. But Sidney didn't quit on a whim. He had thought it through. While most child actors crashed and burned, Sidney saw it coming. He was tired. He hated 4 a.m. call times. He missed baseball. He hated always being cast as William, the sidekick to the bully. He feared becoming a grouchy old kid at 12, and he was only 11. That kind of clarity is rare. Experts say kids don't usually make those decisions until 15. Sidney figured it out years early. He later said he was lucky enough to see the cliff before I stepped off it. That line still gets quoted in child labor studies, because Sidney didn't just escape the industry. He thrived. He went to school, got a business degree, and became a real estate developer. While other child stars battled addiction, jail time, or bankruptcy, Sidney found a new life. He didn't vanish right away, though. Contracts kept him acting for a few more years. He appeared in Bubbling Troubles in 1940 and Fightin' Fools in 1941. Then he had small roles in 2 war films, including Kid Dynamite in 1943. After that, he quietly slipped away. He turned down a 7-year option to be part of a new comedy duo. He even left his makeup kit behind when he walked off set for the last time. He didn't go to the premiere. He listened to it on the radio instead. He didn't want the applause to pull him back in. Years later, he spoke about what it was really like. He said kids had to do 2 hours of school, then film for 6, 8, even 16 hours a day. They worked until directors were satisfied. There were no modern protections. He missed sleep. He nodded off during scenes. The set lights were so hot it felt like being in an oven. Studies show that lack of sleep during childhood increases anxiety and health risks later. Sidney said he had insomnia into his 20s. Carl Switzer, the face everyone knew as Alfalfa from the old Our Gang shorts, had grown up. But he didn't grow into fame or fortune. On the night of January 21st, 1959, he showed up drunk at a small home in Mission Hills, still furious over a $50 reward he believed he was owed. He'd spent that money thanking a stranger who returned a lost hunting dog. But the dog didn't belong to him. It belonged to a man named Moses Stilts. Carl wanted the money back. He wasn't letting it go. The argument got physical fast. Switzer smashed Stilts over the head with a clock. He tried to grab a gun. When that failed, he pulled out a knife. Stilts had already reached his .38. He fired once. The bullet tore through Carl's groin. He bled to death on the way to the hospital. He was only 31. A jury ruled it self-defense. But for many who had known Carl as a child star, it wasn't a surprise. His old co-star, Sidney Kibrick, later said, he was the bully off camera, too. The end had always seemed near. But Carl's story wasn't the only tragedy from that cast. Norman Chaney, who played Chubby, died young from heart failure after drastic weight loss surgery. He was 21. Bobby Hutchins, known as Weezer, died in a plane crash during World War II. He was only 20. Scotty Beckett, once called the next big thing, spiraled into drug addiction and died at 38. Matthew Beard, who fans remembered as Stymie, fought heroin for years before a stroke ended his life at 56. And Darla Hood, the smiling girl in so many episodes, died of heart failure at 47 after a routine surgery went wrong. More than 20 rascals died before reaching old age. Some blamed a curse. Sidney Kibrick didn't. He said it was choices, not fate. He believed he survived because of discipline, savings, and leaving Hollywood at the right time. He walked away at 11 and never looked back. Kibrick took a different path. He went to regular school. He kept away from Hollywood's chaos. Later, he got into real estate and made more money there than he ever had on screen. His parents had insisted on saving every dollar he earned during the Depression. He called that the smartest move they ever made. He watched the others fall. And he kept track, literally. He kept a list of every rascal, their birth, their death, and the cause. Every time another one passed, he updated the file, cried a little, and then got on with his life. It was his way of grieving. In 1981, he organized one final reunion. He called every castmate he could find. He booked hotels, negotiated airfare, and even brought in Leonard Maltin to host. Over 3,000 fans showed up. It felt like history came to life. Some wept during the memorial reels. Others sang old songs. For 2 days, the kids from the screen were together again. And for the first time in decades, they were seen as more than tragic headlines. By 2023, Sidney Kibrick was the last one left. With the deaths of Robert Blake and baby Jane, he became the final link to those early shorts. Reporters called him the lone survivor. Wikipedia updated his bio. People started asking him to fact-check documentaries and fix old myths. It became a new kind of responsibility, and he took it seriously. He hung a sheet in his study with every rascal's name. Birth, death, one by one. When the final box was filled, he added a line beneath it. Just 3 words. I'm still here. He didn't just mourn them, he honored them. In 2022, he showed up at the Hollywood Museum on a blazing hot day. He came riding a replica scooter from the old shorts. He wore a big smile and his original leather jacket. Tourists screamed. He joked. He told stories. And for a moment, it felt like the Rascals were back. Even now, at 96, he walks a mile every morning. He checks in on his real estate investments. He travels with a woman he calls his lady friend. And together they've visited dozens of places. He keeps a DVD player in his bag just to re-watch the old shorts when he's in a hotel. He still drives. He still jokes. And he still eats oatmeal every day because, as he puts it, Spanky loved it. He answers every piece of fan mail by hand. Some are from people in their 80s. Others are from kids. One child from Dublin once asked if he really hated Spanky. Kibrick laughed and sent back a cartoon of Butch chasing Woim. He budgets over $1,000 a year just to make sure even international fans get a reply. He's filled 14 boxes with letters since 1981. He calls them his living diary. Someday, he plans to donate them to a library. For now, they stay with him. People ask how he lasted while so many others didn't. He never says much, just that he had support, he had distance, and he had luck. I'm in extra innings, he told one interviewer, but the umpire hasn't called me out yet. He hopes to live 1 year longer than Hal Roach, the man who started it all. That would make him 104.